One of the reasons why I'm reading Critically Conscious Computing by Amy Ko et al. Is the fact that most of my traditional CS training at Foothill Community College in San Jose State, aka the last 20 or so classes I've taken in CS, has a strong emphasis on this content slice. But there's all these other slices, such as community and society, nature and development, and this meta-learning piece to what it means to learn that has been underdeveloped in my own experience. So let's get to it. Here I am reading chapter 2 from criticallyconsciouscomputing.org. Let me move all of this out of the way so it's not awkward gray spots. Yeah. Okay. Another image by Jesse Huyn, Critical CS Pedagogy is about dialogue more than development. Chapter 2, Critical CS Education Pedagogy by Amy J. Ko. Here are the key ideas. Most arguments for teaching CS stem from goals of serving industry and providing literacy for an informed citizenry, with some arguments centering questions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. An alternative argument for teaching CS is developing students' critical consciousness of computing and society by offering counter-narratives that surface issues of power and oppression at the heart of computing. Predominant CS pedagogy focuses on CS skill development, though newer perspectives in culturally relevant pedagogy, culturally responsive pedagogy, and teaching frameworks of rightful presence can promote critical consciousness to varying degrees. Most popular CS curricula do not embrace critical CS pedagogy, which encourage CS educators to take a creative and activist stance in teaching, centering students' critical consciousness of computing. These are the key ideas. Every teacher, no matter how knowledgeable they are in CS or in pedagogy, faces a difficult choice. How should one teach CS and its many concepts and skills? This choice is complicated by countless factors, including what subset of CS to teach, what teaching methods to use, what tools and technologies to leverage, what curricula might best serve the specific students in the class, and perhaps most importantly, what of all of these choices might best align with the teacher's knowledge, identity, and values. Might best align with the teacher's knowledge, identity, and values. The complexity of this choice, combined with all the other challenges of secondary education, can make teaching CS intimidating and challenging for everyone. And that sense of intimidation is reasonable. Teaching is hard, and the ever-revolving nature of CS can make it even harder. Those who can do, those who teach, do better. Master learner. There is, however, one way of making pedagogical choices easier: deciding why to teach CS. Deciding why can greatly reduce the number of viable pedagogical choices. For example, if a teacher's reason for teaching CS is that they hope students will get good paying jobs in the software industry, that suggests that their pedagogy should be focused on developing marketable skills that employers will recognize and value. This means choosing authentic tools and technologies of practice, regularly updating those choices to align with practice, and staying in conversation with industry to know what to update. In contrast, if a teacher's reason for teaching CS is that they hope students have a basic comprehension of how our computational world works and who controls it, they might choose entirely different pedagogies and assessments, focus more on helping students see how digital technologies are deployed in the world, who made them, why, and what impact they are having. Deciding why to teach CS is therefore one of the most important questions any CS teacher should answer, as it directly informs how they should teach it, and in particular, how they should not. In this chapter, we examine the various reasons for teaching CS common in secondary CS learning contexts and their pedagogical implications. We then examine in detail a particular reason for teaching CS to help students develop critical consciousness about computing in society. and the emerging pedagogies that are necessary for developing that consciousness. Is CS only about skills? Uncritical CS pedagogies. Throughout the history of CS education, there have been many different reasons for teaching CS. We examined some of these briefly in critical CS history from the perspective of competing priorities around CS education reform. Here we examine these reasons pedagogically. Improve students' problem solving. One argument for CS literacy emerging from Pappert's theory of constructionism is that computers and programming can help shape thought, making us better problem solvers. This reason for teaching CS suggests that simply having students make the code they will gain transferable skills to other problem-solving domains such as engineering and mathematics. Pedagogies that support this goal prioritize student problem solving, giving students many computational problems or having them choose problems on their own, and helping them solve those problems, gaining programming and reasoning skills in the STU as they pursue solutions. This kind of teaching and learning is richly detailed by several books on project-based CS pedagogy. While such pedagogies can greatly improve student self-efficacy and shape identity, our best evidence suggests that there is still little transfer to other problem-solving domains. Learning to code does not make youth better at reading, writing, arithmetic, or other subjects. When taught well, CS education focused on problem solving can make students better at coding, and under the best conditions, becoming better at coding will result in modest improvements in metacognitive skills, such as reflecting on one's problem-solving process. However, even improving metacognitive skills specifically for programming is still difficult pedagogically. One study found that even when students' metacognitive strategies were scaffolded as step-by-step problem-solving approaches, impulse control made it challenging for some adolescents to use those strategies, even when they are confident in the efficacy of those strategies. Another study showed that scaffolding problem-solving awareness by building a classroom culture around self-regulation could help adolescents manage impulse control, which led to them choosing better problem-solving strategies. Thus, teaching CS to improve problem-solving under ideal conditions improves CS problem-solving and may moderately improve students' general metacognition. And under less than ideal conditions, students often struggle to learn to code, gain no metacognitive skills, and lose confidence in their ability to learn code and learn in general. Prepare students for industry jobs. Another common reason for teaching CS starts from the position that programming is itself intrinsically valuable knowledge because it is a skill that can lead to stable, lucrative, powerful, and broadly respected careers in software engineering. This argument was at the heart of the CS for All initiative in the United States launched by Obama administration in 2016. Computer Science for All is the president's bold new initiative to empower all American students from kindergarten through high school to learn computer science and be equipped with the computational thinking skills they need to be creators in the digital economy, not just consumers, said US President Barack Obama, 2016. This argument emerged from industry and higher education advocacy, positioned CS education as expanding the number of CS graduates that can serve the software industry, and often cited statistics about software engineering shortages. Behind this empowerment argument was also a neoliberal argument, suggesting that the purpose of school is to suggesting that the purpose of school is to develop skills in youth that serve industry goals of creating and expanding the digital economy. The pedagogical implications of this position are fairly clear. In contrast to the problem-solving rationale above, CS education that focuses on jobs must necessarily focus on marketable skills. Perhaps the purest example of this are coding bootcamps, which emerge in response to market demand and a lack of school, college, and university interest in being so market-driven. For example, one notable coding bootcamp is the Ada Developers Academy, which specifically focuses on teaching women and gender-expansive adults marketable coding skills. Its curriculum focuses narrowly on skills that will lead to internships and jobs. At the time of this writing, this included programming languages and technologies such as Python, HTML, CSS, Flask, SQL, JavaScript, and React, as well as workplace skills such as communication, leadership, allyship, and advocacy. Focusing on jobs, therefore, means focusing on pedagogies that center highly practical technical skills over foundations and critical perspectives on code. Of course, the tension in this reason for teaching CS is that there isn't really a shortage of developers who want to work in the software industry. There are millions of developers globally ready to work with dated technical skills, and ageism against older developers is common. The result is not only not-for-profit boot camps like ADA, but also countless for-profit and corporate training programs offered by Google, Microsoft, Oracle, and IBM, all intended to train people on the specific skills that companies need. Secondary educators, particularly those in public schools, should therefore question whether middle and high school classrooms should be trying to replicate these industry training efforts and whether they even have the resources and time to do it in a way that students can compete. Subtitle: Democratize Computing Literacy. Some reform efforts in the US, as well as many globally, focus less on economic and diversity arguments, instead arguing for a kind of universal literacy for democratic citizenship. For example, in the UK, the Computing at Schools initiative argued that, quote, a lack of CS knowledge renders students powerless in the face of complex and opaque technology, disenfranchises them from making informed decisions about the digital society. From the Computing at School, 2016. Many countries, including Australia, Russia, many EU nations, Japan, and South Korea, leveraged similar rhetoric and began to require CS education in primary and secondary schools to ensure this universal literacy. However, because these arguments did not come with any precise idea about what a computing literacy would entail, their pedagogical implications are less clear. The result is that most CS education efforts motivated by literacy goals have defaulted to teaching coding skills. The underlying rationale is that 1, learning to code will give youth insight on how software works and how to create it. 2, these insights will empower youth to make consumer and civic judgments about how software is used in their lives and society. These arguments necessitate pedagogies that focus on developing programming skills and then linking those skills somehow to personal, social, political, and policy choices that youth might be called upon to make, including consumer choices about which products to buy and whether to support policy changes about security, privacy, and other rights. To date, however, there is little evidence that learning to code has any such impact on people's future judgments about technology and society in the world. There is abundant evidence, however, that many technical leaders in software industries, despite knowing much about programming, still make judgments about society that are counter to many people's values and interests. Moreover, there is evidence that learning to code in learning contexts that do not meaningfully connect CS to student identity and society can have unintended consequences, such as youth having reduced interest in CS, viewing programming as difficult and frustrating, and perceptions of some students having geek genes and some not. Perceptions of some students having geek genes and some not. Focusing universal literacy around programming, therefore, may not result in an informed electorate, but rather a less diverse group of people with CS knowledge who hold power and a larger group of citizens without the confidence that they have the expertise to make sound judgments about technology. Critical CS Pedagogy, subtitle. The common thread amongst all of these arguments for CS education above is that computing is a neutral skill. The goal is to educate youth about abstract ideas in CS and inspire you to create with those ideas, but rarely question what computing is used for or how it is shaping society. Moreover, these arguments do not question who shaped these ideas, why those ideas were created, and what alternative ideas in CS might exist had different voices participated in shaping them. For example, the CSTA standards broadly adopted across the United States and adapted worldwide has several standards related to impacts of computing, include learning objectives like evaluate computational artifacts to maximize their beneficial effects and minimize harmful effects on society. Such efforts, aside from being framed as a utilitarian optimization problem, never question whether software should be made in the first place, do not examine who benefits and who is harmed, and do not critically engage with human values and their tensions. Critical perspectives on computing are ones that ask, what is Facebook doing with our data and why? Why are the police using racist data on crime to influence where they patrol? Why are Silicon Valley companies protected from litigation about cyberbullying? Critical perspectives accept that CS has great potential and power to shape individual lives, but also question the application of that power, ask who has that power, ponder how that power should be distributed, and insist on the responsibility of those who possess it. One of the first people to call for such critical questions in learning contexts was Paulo Freire, a Brazilian educator and author of a seminal text on critical pedagogy called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. In his book, Freire articulated a view of society as a dynamic, ever-evolving system through which power is woven. Power, in his sense, was the ability to influence the behavior and actions of others. For example, a teacher often has power over students in that they may produce grades that influence whether students get admitted to college. Colleges have power over students in which they make admissions decisions. Parents have influence over whether youth view college as viable, desirable, and worthwhile. Freire, of course, viewed power as being held more generally in society by politicians, leaders, and in capitalist societies, those with immense wealth. In Freire's view, power, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally, can oppress, creating social structures, institutions, ideas, and myths that sustain the wealth, way of life, and the power of oppressors. And this all comes at the expense of the oppressed. And such power can appear in subtle, unintended ways. A teacher, for example, might unknowingly place students who perceive to be disruptive in the back of a class and consequently give them less attention. And this lack of attention might result in those students having lower self-efficacy in that subject. In the same way, politicians might pass a well-intended law that has unintended consequences. To Freire, these forms of oppression, while not intentional or nefarious, are still oppression. Of course, Freire was also talking about intentional macro-scale oppression. His childhood was defined by poverty and hunger. It was only later in his life he realized that his social class and the politics around class in Brazil had actively prevented economic liberation of people in poverty in Brazil. These observations and his own self-reflections on why he was unable to recognize the oppression in his youth shaped his ideas for critical pedagogy. He viewed education as the primary means to overcome oppression. At their foundation, Freire's ideas started from a critique of the banking model of education in which students are viewed as accounts to be filled with valuable ideas from teachers through lectures and books. All the pedagogies discussed earlier are essentially banking models, viewing students as recipients of coding skill knowledge. Freire argued that the banking model of learning, quote, transforms students into receiving objects and attempts to control thinking and action, leading men and women to adjust to the world, inhibiting their creative power. Freire in Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Freire argued that youth learning in a banking model not only cannot see the nature of their oppression in school or outside of it, but learn to become reluctant to resist their oppression, having, quote, a diffuse magical belief in the invulnerability and power of the oppressor in Pedagogy of the Oppressed. In the context of CS, Freire might have argued that people cannot see how they are oppressed by a faceless, nameless credit reporting agency like Experian, which controls data and credit score calculation algorithms that determine access to loans. And he might have argued that the banking model of education, still widely used throughout public education worldwide, only reinforces the ignorance of social political dynamics of CS and their relation to students' individual lives and opportunities. To overcome ignorance, Fieri advocated consciência, Portuguese for consciousness raising or critical consciousness. And in his own words, quote, in order for the oppressed to be able to wage a struggle for their liberation, they must perceive the reality of oppression not as a closed world from which there is no exit, but as a limiting situation which they can transform. This perception is a necessary but not a sufficient condition for liberation. It must become the motivating force for liberating action. On page 49 in Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Fieri's notion of the limiting situation was central. He viewed the purpose of education as empowering each individual to make critical socio-political judgments of their life and circumstances. He viewed critical consciousness as both key to recognizing and accepting their own humanity and to generating the immense motivation necessary for making social change through collective action. As an alternative to the banking model of lecturing, Fieri advocated for dialogic teaching methods. In dialogic teaching, the goal is not to deposit knowledge as in the banking model, but to co-create knowledge through reflective dialogue. A critical CS teacher, for example, might bring the topic of facial recognition to a class, not with a particular political message, to transmit, but as a way of learning in partnership with their students how facial recognition technology intersects with and interacts with their students' limiting situations. Imagine, for example, the teacher describing the technology, sharing the evidence, sharing that it is far less accurate on Black faces, sharing stories of false arrests on Black men by police relying on facial recognition, and asking students to describe their own experiences with facial recognition. Perhaps few were aware that it was being used, but one Black student shares, "We have one of those cameras at our store on our corner. My brother got arrested once because the police said they saw his face on a recording of the store being held up. He didn't do it, but he spent a week in jail and lost his job." The teacher didn't come to class knowing they would hear that story, and the student didn't come to class knowing that they would share it. But through dialogue about facial recognition in students' lives, the story emerged, and then the class could continue the discussion, understanding the ways that facial recognition might be perceived as a technology that provides safety to some students and incarceration, instability, and poverty to others. While this facial recognition example intersects easily with questions of justice and oppression, even more foundational and mundane topics in CS connect to similar questions. For example, consider programming language syntax, which we'll explain in more detail in chapter 10. Programming languages use something called keywords to define terms that have special meaning in computer programs. One example is the word int, int, which is often used to tell a computer that the data value stored in the computer's memory is a mathematical integer. A critical CS teacher might start a lesson talking about int, sharing the history of the word, its connection to mathematics, and then asking students how a computer might represent their intelligence using an int. Or consider ASCII, ASCII, an early standard for encoding textual data. A critical CS teacher might start a lesson by talking about how ASCII supported only Roman characters, including North American and Europe, but excluding the rest of the world. Such discourse among students will quickly reveal that even something as simple as a single number, a data type or keyword, or encoding standard connects to complex social, political, and cultural ideas about what it means to be smart and the way that computers rely on integers can force oppressive classifications upon people and their opportunities. Fieri, in imagining such dialogic pedagogy, viewed politics as inseparable from education. The point of dialogic methods was not simply to have discussion, but to awaken students in their limiting situations, inspire them to organize around their shared oppression, and eventually to use that organization to liberate themselves through social change. Fieri wanted activism and revolution and viewed education as perhaps the only institution capable of enabling such social change. One could imagine, then, continuing the scenario above, that the CS teacher might build upon the class's new consciousness of the threats of facial recognition, integers, and ASCII to interrogate the other uses in surveillance and categorization in their school, such as data collected about tardiness, the errors and bias in that data, the software that uses the data to automatically notify parents and suspend students, the integer grades each class computes, and the ways that such software might be systematically disenfranchising some students from their education. And that analysis might lead students to organize and advocate for reform. Fieri would not only celebrate students' leadership in this analysis as a triumph in critical pedagogy, but view it as central to building their critical consciousness, their confidence in their ability to make social change, and their liberation for the systems of power that control, that shape their experience at school. For many teachers, it may be concerning to imagine giving up so much control to students and frightening to imagine intentionally facilitating student organizing and activism. After all, much of modern teaching is concerned with behavioral concerns such as classroom management, regulating student attention, and preventing disruption. Fieri would respond to these concerns and fears by naming them for what they are: the reactions of an oppressor who sees risk in giving up power by enabling student agency, embracing student diversity, and building upon student assets. He would argue that if we want students to grow to be leaders of social change, framing schools as places of control and regulation is exactly the opposite of learning. Fieri challenged teachers to have faith that if we center students' lives in our teaching and empower them to shape their learning, whatever disruption they cause might be the late activist John Lewis called good trouble, necessary trouble. Subheading: Critical CS Content Knowledge. A key foundation to teaching CS is, of course, content knowledge in CS. For example, if a teacher wants to teach youth to code or to be critical about code, how can they do so if they do not know how to code themselves? But if we embrace the goal of critical consciousness and we accept the purpose of teaching CS as developing critical consciousness of computing, then the key content knowledge for teachers to learn is not about technical concepts in CS, but rather critical perspectives on those technical ideas they can relate to computing in society. In fact, critical CS pedagogy might require less depth in technical CS topics and more breadth of knowledge about the intersections between power, computing, and students' lives so that they may bring these intersections to students' awareness and facilitate dialogue about them. This book will attempt to survey CS content knowledge sociopolitically, giving you sufficient depth in technical CS knowledge while covering a breadth of knowledge about the intersections between these technical ideas and their impact on individuals and society. To help organize these ideas, we will focus on sharing narratives and counter-narratives about computing, helping you surface the contrasting political views about what CS is and is for. For example, consider one overarching dominant narrative about CS, often shared by large tech companies. Quote, CS is making the world a better place. The software that technology companies make is created by very smart men. These men are well compensated, but have earned this wealth through their hard work and intelligence. Because they are smart, we should trust their choices about what technology to make and how to make it. As long as we continue to give them power, they will create a utopia in everyone's life, in which everyone's life is easier, better, and comfortable, end quote. Not specified by who said the quote exactly, but I think I can think of a few people who have said something along the same lines. This narrative is the one often shared by people with power in CS through marketing, journalism, and even CS curricular materials created by software companies. It is one that asks the public to trust a small minority of mostly cis, non-disabled white and Asian men with creating a computational world that works for everyone else, and to reward them for this wealth and power, even when they fail to realize this utopian vision for everyone, especially those at the margins. In this book, we will teach a counter-narrative, one that questions the dominant narrative above and positions you to help students develop their own counter-narratives about CS. Our counter-narrative is as follows, quote, "Computing is a disruptive technology transforming every industry and human activity in the world in ways that are often imperceptible. But a small minority of humanity, an estimated 30 million people worldwide who create software professionally, are the ones shaping this transformation. These software engineers are overwhelmingly white and or Asian, wealthy, cis, heterosexual men in North America, Europe, and Asia, educated in CS departments with heterogeneous values and limited knowledge of human diversity. This raises questions of responsibility. What duty does this 1% of humanity have in ensuring that how they are reshaping society with software actually serves all of us, not just those in dominant groups and not just those with power? At present, the most powerful software companies are private or at best publicly traded companies and are not beholden to the general public. Governments have been reluctant to impose any regulations on software companies to make them beholden and have even passed laws that free software companies. Beholden means, I don't know what beholden means, but have passed laws that free software companies from responsibility. There's little sign that the public and therefore politicians have any interest in returning any power over software to the public. Until the public understands these power dynamics, there will be little hope for changing the balance of power to ensure that our computational world serves everyone. The narrative above is something we will elaborate on and deepen in the coming chapters, examining how the technical ideas in CS connect to socio-political dynamics above. We will then build upon that content knowledge by offering pedagogical content knowledge on how to use dialogic teaching methods to help students develop their own personal counter-narratives about computing. Critical CS, pedagogical content knowledge, subtitle. The dominant narrative above, along with the problem-solving career and literacy arguments earlier in the chapter, have predominantly led to CS pedagogy that focuses on developing students' coding skills. Teaching methods in this dominant paradigm include lectures on programming language concepts, problem sets in which students attempt to solve computational problems by writing programs that meet some specification, and exams in which students demonstrate their ability to read and write computer programs correctly. There's an image by Jesse Huyn. Discourse is at the heart of critical CS consciousness. Such pedagogy is common in curricula like the Advanced Placement CS course. Across many of the skill-focused career and technical education programming courses throughout the United States, as well as throughout higher education globally. In these classrooms, there's little room for student agency, identity, or interest. The goal is to train skilled software developers and write correct, quote unquote, correct programs whose requirements were crafted by a teacher or someone else. Tools such as autograders reinforce this idea, rewarding students who can produce correct code in a fixed period of time in isolation from peers, and punishing those who cannot. Such classrooms, that was a bar right there. Tools such as autograders reinforce this idea, rewarding students who can produce correct code in a fixed period of time in isolation from peers and punishing those who cannot. Such classrooms will inadvertently end up shaping who is perceived smart, which is more often shaped by gendered and racialized preparatory privilege than anything inherent to students themselves. Clearly, such pedagogy leaves little room for the counter-narrative we presented above. There are opportunities for making such pedagogy more critical, but they are limited. For example, teachers might offer a variety of problem sets that are situated in ways that are relevant to student interests or examine problems of power, oppression, and injustice. Lectures on CS concepts might integrate broader social context about how these concepts are used in society. Assessments might be expanded not only to evaluate students' programming skill, but their understanding of computing and society. All of these strategies have potential to engage the critical CS counter-narrative above, but preserve the dominant motive and architecture of this pedagogy, training competent software developers, just doing it in a way that is slightly more responsive to student diversity and raises peripheral conversations about how CS is used in the world. Moreover, they leave no room to discover what counter-narratives students have in their lived experiences with computing. Therefore, critical CS pedagogy requires fundamentally different methods than those that strictly and narrowly focus on developing coding skills. We can look to methods from education more broadly for guidance. For example, in the 1990s, culturally relevant pedagogy, also called culturally responsive pedagogy, emerged, recognizing the diversity of cultures, perspectives, and values that students bring to classrooms. One central facet of this framework is cultural competence, which refers to the teacher's own understanding of the cultures, perspectives, and values in their classroom. Culturally relevant pedagogy argues that teachers should not only be competent about their students' cultures, but use their cultures as the basis for learning, recognizing, and honoring the diversity of cultural beliefs in a group of students, while also helping students develop their own cultural competence. Additionally, culturally relevant pedagogy also positions teachers as liberators of students in the tradition of Fieri, helping students to understand their position in society in the context of the topic. Importantly, culturally responsive teaching does not generalize or stereotype particular groups, for example, girls or Latinos, but rather engages youth in their specific socially constructed identities and cultures. In CS, culturally relevant pedagogy has been applied in curricula like Exploring CS, which integrates reflections and discussions of the opportunities and risks on the internet, or the trade-offs of automating tasks with robotics. This curriculum encourages teachers to engage students in critical analysis of these trade-offs, share their own experiences and perspectives with each other, and develop their own narratives about the purpose of computing technologies in society. Culturally responsive pedagogy, however, is far from just adopting activities. It can take multidisciplinary teams of teachers and culture experts to develop equity-oriented, culturally grounded teaching methods. Teachers can struggle to develop these teams and expertise and often have to make many assumptions about students when preparing. Building upon, but also critiquing culturally relevant pedagogy was Django Paris's culturally sustaining pedagogy. This work argued that while ensuring that teaching is relevant and responsive to students' diverse cultures is critical, it is not enough to resist the tendency of schools to create and perpetuate monocultural and monolingual society. Culturally sustaining pedagogy seeks to resist these forces by instead perpetuating and fostering the linguistic and cultural pluralism of diverse communities. In CS education, this might mean engaging in project-based learning that challenges the ways that software centralizes, standardizes, and erases cultural diversity, but also celebrates some of the ways it enables expression of cultural diversity through media. For example, a project might examine how the English versions of Wikipedia topics compare with their non-English counterparts and critically analyze what role Wikipedia and its platform have in reshaping those differences. Similar to Fieri, Calabrese, Barton, and Tan argued for a framework of rightful presence in classrooms, centering justice in teaching. This framework criticizes ideas of inclusion, as we have done above, as having limited aspects on systemic inequities in society. The framework's core aim is to make systemic injustices visible in the classroom, positioning learning as an allied political struggle for rights, engaging students in discourse about political injustices and possible social futures, and recognizing the need to disrupt the normative power relations in classrooms to make such visibility possible. Much like Fieri, rightful presence views the purpose of learning as critical consciousness, but goes further in specifically centering the systemic inequities experienced by students with particular identities in learning, even if not all students in the class share that identity. In CS, some scholars have drawn upon similar perspectives to argue for more justice-centered computing education, centering injustice in how we talk about the systems of power centered around CS. For example, Rio et al. Explored rightful presence in CS by giving agency to adolescents in a diverse CS classroom. Students use that agency to leverage CS skills to tell stories of racialized grief due to police violence, to organize community activism around student mental health, and to challenge deficit notions of CS by linking CS to other disciplines. Barton and Tan explored rightful presence in classrooms, making space for discourse about students marginalizing school experiences to inspire more sustainable classrooms. Everson et al. Explored rightful presence in a high school CS summer course by co-constructing the course with students, finding that making space for critical conversations about CS required first building trust and overcoming the broader inequities in the system outside of the classroom. But that once trust was built, students rapidly engage counter-narratives about CS and link them to their personal lives. These critical practices align closely with studies that show that the pedagogies most impactful to students' interests with CS are those that demystify CS by showing connections to everyday life, that address social issues impacting students' communities, and that value students' voices and perspectives. Each of these critical CS pedagogies link to critical consciousness in different ways and engage student identity with different goals. What they have in common, however, is their methods, which predominantly interleave project-based learning and discussion that centers student agency, identities, and interests. Technical CS content is not at the center of these methods, but rather skills and knowledge to be gained as part of projects or topics of reflection and debate as part of discussions. Throughout the rest of the book, we will provide the examples of all of these methods, demonstrating how to link them, both technical and socio-technical concepts in CS through student identity. Critical CS curricula, subtitle. In many ways, although Fieri's ideas have been around for decades, education researchers are only just beginning to apply, extend, and refine them, and educators themselves are only just beginning to learn of them in professional development. This is particularly true in CS education, where the dominant frameworks of learning have been the very banking model that Fieri critiqued, and most CS professional development has focused on developing teacher content knowledge about coding rather than CS and society. The result is that most curricula lack critical perspectives. For example, consider some of the popular CS curricula. Advanced Placement CSA, APCSA, strictly focuses on developing students' programming skill with no room for student identity or agency. Some curriculum providers, such as Code.org, are working on more culturally responsive versions of the course, but without engaging any questions of power, oppression, or justice. Bootstrap Algebra elegantly integrates algebra and CS concepts, developing robust student knowledge about both algebra, algorithms, and programming. However, it presents an uncritical view of computing, centering games, image analysis, and mathematics, and the abstract computing concepts that underlie them. Code.org CS Discoveries provide a broad survey of programming topics centering problem solving, game development, web development, data science, and physical computing. While it focuses on developing student interest and self-efficacy with coding, it only briefly touches on questions about data and society. Exploring computer science centers diversity and inclusion and makes ample space to reflect on many of the interactions between CS and society, but these topics are often peripheral to making, building, and coding. Teachers who participate in exploring computer science professional development often focus on inclusion, overlooking opportunities for growing students' critical consciousness. Advanced Placement CS Principles makes room for student agency and identity, especially by using a portfolio-based assessment rather than an exam, and includes a whole unit on impact of computing, including topics of bias, ethics, and equity. However, the AP exam does not assess these topics, and so teachers often exclude them. And curriculum providers such as the Beauty and Joy of Computing frame them as peripheral to the primary focus on coding. Therefore, these and other curricula, while excellent for helping youth develop skills and confidence in coding, do little to engage youth in developing critical consciousness of computing and society. Moreover, they still struggle to reach baseline levels of inclusion, with many leaving little room for student identity, several posing insurmountable accessibility barriers to students with disabilities, and many overlooking bilingual students' needs for translanguaging support. Conclusion: CS pedagogy for all. While focusing on critical perspectives can reduce the pressure on both teachers and students to achieve technical mastery of coding, center student identity and agency, and position you to address injustice, it has trade-offs pedagogical. For example, some students might benefit greatly from developing problem-solving skills in CS, building identity and growth mindset, whereas lacking, some students might really want a job that requires marketable skills and therefore might not resonate with critical perspectives. And there certainly is a case to make for CS literacy of some kind, including some basic understanding of the construction of software. If not other social technical perspectives on CS, the pedagogical challenge for teachers then is how to serve the diversity of needs and dreams that students bring to the classroom. Critical CS pedagogy is arguably the most inclusive way to do this, as it prioritizes marginalization, but it may require drawing upon other uncritical CS pedagogies to include everyone. Throughout the rest of the book, we will offer methods that try to balance these pedagogies to ensure inclusion. Here is some CSTA standards and references. Yeah, that's a wrap for this chapter. It's like running out of energy. Is the third one I've done today of this. So more to come. I think I will actually write my reflection in the description of the video to act as a where I'm actually generating my own ideas from the reading. So lastly, the least important thing is what I say. The most important things are the changes to your own attitudes, beliefs, relationships, behaviors, and knowledge. Okay, until next time.